The Moscow of 1974 was a city of ideological certainties and profound unspoken anxieties. It was the apex of the Brezhnev-era Zastoy, the stagnation, a period where the Soviet Union projected an image of immutable strength, even as the mechanisms of its society slowly seized up. The air, heavy with the exhaust of diesel buses and the low-grade coal smoke from the TET's power stations, seemed to hold a physical weight. For Arthur Penwright, Second Secretary of the Cultural Affairs Desk at the British Embassy, this weight was both a professional hazard and a personal burden. Penwright, 34, was a man of calculated stillness. His appearance was intentionally unremarkable. Thinning brown hair, serviceable glasses, and a rotation of dark wool suits that seemed to absorb the weak winter light. His official duties were a study in negotiated tedium. He arranged for visiting British academics to speak on sanitized topics, negotiated the import of approved British films for small, invitation-only screenings, and attended endless, smoke-filled receptions at the various cultural ministries. He drank his share of Stolichnaya and Soviet Champanskoye, exchanged platitudes about cultural exchange, and filed reports on the rigid mediocrity of officially sanctioned Soviet artists. His real work, mandated by the SIS, MI6, was quieter. He was not a high-stakes operative. He was a spotter and a postman. His job was to observe the hierarchies, to identify the quiet dissatisfactions, the rivalries, and the potential weaknesses within the Soviet cultural apparatus. He was looking for the administrator passed over for promotion, the writer whose work was just a little too allegorical, the academic who cracked access to Western journals. His other task was servicing the occasional dead letter drop, a brush pass in the gum department store, or leaving a signal in a designated location, a chalk mark on a specific park bench, a book returned to a library with a marginal notation. He was, by all accounts, meticulous, patient, and emotionally detached. His life was compartmentalized, dictated by the strict rules of diplomatic existence in the Soviet capital. He lived in the foreign diplomatic compound on Kutuzovsky Prospect, a purpose-built ghetto for the Westerners the state wished to both accommodate and isolate. His apartment was spacious by Soviet standards but sterile, furnished with functional heavy furniture provided by the state. He knew, as a matter of professional certainty, that his apartment was monitored. His housekeeper, a stout, unsmiling woman named Zinaida, was a shtatny sotrudnik, a staff employee of the KGB-affiliated agency UPDK, main administration for service to the diplomatic corps. He assumed the apartment contained at least 3 slon, elephant listening devices, and that Zinaida's reports on his habits, what he ate, what he read, when he slept, were filed weekly. This environment bred a specific kind of paranoia, one that Penwright had trained to manage. He separated his clean life, his apartment, the embassy, from his operational life, the streets. But the isolation was corrosive. The other diplomats were often just as guarded, their own careers and rivalries creating a different kind of internal friction. Arthur Penwright, the spy, was a professional. Arthur Penwright, the man, was profoundly lonely. It was at a Goskino, State Committee for Cinematography reception in October 1974, celebrating a dry documentary on tractor production, that he first saw Svetlana Ivanova. She was not an official. She was not an artist. She was one of the dozens of anonymous women who made the ministry's function. She was a secretary, a typist, standing near the back of the reception hall, ensuring the coffee urns remained full and the platters of zakuski were replenished. She was unremarkable in the way he was unremarkable. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled back severely, wearing a drab brown skirt and a white blouse. But as he watched her over the rim of his glass, he saw her, in a moment when she thought no one was looking, roll her eyes at a puffed-up director's speech. It was a tiny, human-scale rebellion, a crack in the monolithic facade. He felt an immediate, unprofessional pull. He did not approach her. He simply filed her face away, a small anomaly in a world of rigid conformity. The early signs of Arthur Penwright's professional decline were not marked by a sudden dramatic breach of protocol. They were a slow erosion, a series of micro-deviations from the sterile tradecraft that had defined his posting. The anomaly of the Goskino typist lingered in his mind. He found himself thinking of that brief flash of defiance, of cynicism, and he began, almost unconsciously, to rationalize. Was she not exactly the type of person his directives described? Someone on the inside, yet unimportant. Someone who saw the internal workings, the memos, the schedules, the petty jealousies, but who was herself invisible. He told himself it was professional curiosity. He used his official cultural contacts to request a list of staff at Goskino involved in organizing the recent screening. Her name was there. Svetlana Yuryevna Ivanova, typist, Komsomol member, file number 44B. He allowed 2 weeks to pass. Then, invoking his cultural attaché status, he visited the Goskino archives on a manufactured pretext, researching Soviet-British co-productions from the 1940s. He knew she worked in the administrative wing. He lost his way in the labyrinthine corridors of the Stalinist-era building, eventually finding the typing pool. It was a cavernous room, filled with the clatter of Ukraina typewriters. He spotted her. He made his approach. "Excuse me," he said in his careful, slightly accented Russian. "I'm afraid I'm lost. I'm looking for the office of Deputy Director Petrov." Svetlana looked up, her fingers pausing on the keys. Close up, he saw she was tired. There were faint shadows under her eyes, but her gaze was direct, intelligent, and wary. A foreign diplomat, unescorted, in the administrative wing was not a normal event. "You are on the wrong floor, Gospodin, sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "This is administration. The deputy director's office is on the 3rd floor, Wing B." My apologies. Thank you." He smiled, a gesture he had practiced to be disarming. "Arthur Penwright, British Embassy. It is a maze in here." He lingered for a beat longer than necessary. "You were at the reception last month. For the tractor film." Her wariness intensified, mixed with surprise. I work at many receptions, Gospodin." "Of course." He nodded, backing away. "Thank you for your help, Miss Ivanova," she said, cutting him off before he could read her nameplate. She turned back to her typewriter. The contact was brief, irregular, but defensible. He had been lost. But he had confirmed her identity. The next step was the critical violation. He did not file a report on the contact. He did not open a preliminary spotting file to be reviewed by his head of station. He kept it for himself. This was the first early sign. He compartmentalized his professional life from his own service. His real error came a week later. He had a scheduled brush pass to deliver a small payment to a low-level informant, a disgruntled translator at the Progress Publishing House. The operation required a meticulous surveillance detection route, SDR, a 3-hour convoluted journey through Moscow, using reflections in shop windows, doubling back in the metro, and changing buses unexpectedly. He completed his SDR, made the pass, and confirmed he was clean. But instead of returning directly to the clean zone of the embassy compound, he took a detour. He told himself he was just walking the city, maintaining his cover as a cultural enthusiast. He found himself near the Arbat, and then, as if by chance, near the Kropotkinskaya metro station, which he knew was on her route home from Goskino. He waited, feeling the chill of the November evening. It was a fool's errand. And then he saw her. She was in a queue for kvass, the fermented rye bread drink, from a street vendor. He approached her. "Svetlana Yuryevna," he said, stepping out of the crowd. She startled, spilling a few drops of kvass on her glove. Her reaction was not pleasure. It was a flash of pure fear. "Mr. Penwright, what are you doing here?" Her eyes darted around the crowded square. "I was just enjoying the architecture," he lied weakly. "May I buy you another?" "No." "You must not be here," she hissed, her voice low. "It is not correct. Please." She turned and walked quickly toward the metro entrance. He watched her go, a cold realization dawning. He had not just broken protocol. He had been clumsy. He had frightened her. And, more importantly, he had established a pattern. He had deviated from his clean route, after an operational act, to make an unauthorized personal contact. In the precise analytical world of counterintelligence, a pattern is an invitation. The discovery did not happen in a smoke-filled room with a map. It occurred on a gray, nondescript piece of paper, a surveillance log sheet deep within the walls of the KGB's Second Chief Directorate, Counterintelligence. The building at 2 Dzerzhinsky Square, the Lubyanka, was the nerve center of Soviet state security, a place that ran on paranoia, bureaucracy, and meticulous record-keeping. Major Viktor Orlov, a 15-year veteran of the Second Directorate's Line KR, Counterintelligence for the Diplomatic Corps, was the man who read the log sheet. Orlov was not a fanatic, he was a professional. He viewed the Western diplomats in Moscow not as people, but as objects to be managed, studied, and, if possible, exploited. He was patient, methodical, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of embassy protocols and personnel. His attention was drawn to Object 14B, Arthur Penwright, for a simple reason. Penwright was boring. His movements were predictable. He followed his SDRs cleanly. His housekeeper, Source Zenaida, reported a life of quiet routine, reading, listening to BBC radio, and consuming a predictable amount of embassy-supplied whiskey. But on November 12th, the report from the Nablyu surveillance team, the Toptuni stompers who followed him, noted the anomaly. 2017, Object 14B completes operational act, pass, file 229 translator at Ploshchad Revolutsiai. 2021, Object 14B confirms clean status. 2023, Object 14B deviates from designated clean route. 2045, Object 14B initiates contact with unidentified female citizen, Kropotkinskaya Square. 2047, contact terminated by female citizen. Object 14B proceeds to Kutuzovsky Prospect. To Orlov, this was a flashing red light. A trained operative never deviates after an act. It's the height of vulnerability, and to make a cold contact with an unknown citizen, it was either supreme arrogance or catastrophic stupidity. Orlov put down his paparosa, cigarette, and made a note. Identify female. The surveillance team that had been passively monitoring Penwright was doubled. They were no longer just tracking his official movements. They were hunting. They ran the description of the woman. They cross-referenced the time of day with nearby workplaces. And then they got a hit from the militianer who patrolled the Goskino neighborhood, a part-time KGB informant. He recognized the description of the woman from the Goskino administrative pool. A few days later, a Toptun team photographed Penwright accidentally meeting Svetlana Ivanova at the gum department store. He bought her a Morozhenoye, ice cream. The contact lasted 4 minutes. This was the discovery. It wasn't about espionage. It was about vulnerability. Major Orlov opened a new Delo file. Its cover was stamped Goryachi, hot, and given the code name Romeo. He pulled Svetlana Ivanova's file. It was thin. Komsomol member, good work record, no unauthorized foreign contacts, lived with her widowed mother in a small apartment near the Prospect Mira station. She was clean. Orlov leaned back, satisfied. This was perfect. A clean target meant Penwright's interest was likely not professional. If it wasn't professional, it was personal. And personal, in Major Orlov's experience, was a lever. He now had 2 possibilities. 1, the boring cultural attaché was a Romeo spy attempting to cultivate a low-level Goskino typist for information. This was unlikely. The risk-reward was too low. 2, the boring cultural attaché was genuinely infatuated. He was breaking his own rules for a woman. This was infinitely more useful. Orlov issued 2 sets of orders. The first was to Line R, operational surveillance, to install technical measures in Svetlana Ivanova's apartment and on her phone line. The Ushie, ears, would begin listening. The second order was to his Toptuni. Do not interdict, do not approach, observe, record, let the Romeo develop the asset for us. The discovery was not that Arthur Penwright was a spy, they had always assumed that. The discovery was that he was a fool. The machinery of the Soviet surveillance state, once activated, was vast and impersonal. For Major Orlov, the Romeo file was now an active operational study. For Arthur Penwright and Svetlana Ivanova, it was the beginning of a suffocating, invisible pressure. Orlov's team from the 7th Directorate, technical support, was efficient. While Svetlana and her mother were at work, a 2-man team, disguised as telephone repairmen, entered their apartment. They installed a granite transmitter in the base of the telephone and a slan bug in the molding of the main living room. From that day forward, every conversation, every sigh, every clink of a teacup in Svetlana's home was recorded on reel-to-reel tapes in a listening post 3 blocks away. The top tuning teams were expanded. Penwright, as a diplomat, already had a passive team. Now Svetlana, a Soviet citizen, was assigned her own. A rotation of men in ill-fitting suits and women pushing empty prams became fixtures in her neighborhood. They sat in the canteen at Goskino. They waited at her bus stop. They were the shadows that gave the system its omnipresence. For Arthur, the romance, as he was now forced to admit it was a dangerous, exhilarating departure from his sterile life. He and Svetlana began to meet, carefully at first, then with increasing frequency. They used the classic Moscow safe zones, the crowded halls of the Gum, the anonymity of Gorky Park in winter, the noisy, rattling carriages of the metro during rush hour. Their conversations, meticulously recorded by Orlov's ears, were a study in caution. They spoke of films, of samizdat, banned literature that Arthur hinted at, of her frustrations at work. The deputy director, Svetlana complained one snowy afternoon, huddled with Arthur on a bench near the frozen pond. He took my report, he retyped the front page with his name, and he gave it to the minister. He got the credit. I am just a machine. It's the same in my world, Sveta. Arthur replied, a genuine note of empathy in his voice. The men at the top, they always take the credit. To a Western ear, it was banal office politics. To Major Orlov, listening to the tape, it was motive, dissatisfaction, resentment of authority. He circled the words in his transcript. Arthur, meanwhile, began to feel the pressure. He was a trained observer, and he knew the signs of surveillance. He started hearing the faint rhythmic click on his own apartment phone, the sound of the tape reel turning at the local ATS, telephone exchange. The devushka operator at the embassy switchboard, who used to joke with him, was now curt and formal. He started dry cleaning, testing for surveillance. He would abruptly get off a bus only to see a man in a gray coat who had been on the same bus get off at the next stop and take a taxi back. He would stop to tie his shoe in a shop doorway, using the glass reflection to watch the street. He saw them. He knew they were there. But here was the critical failure. His training told him to disengage. The moment he made the surveillance, he was supposed to break off all non-essential contact, especially with the asset, and report it. He did not. He convinced himself the surveillance was standard. He told himself it was just the usual low-level diplomatic harassment. He did this because the alternative, to stop seeing Svetlana, had become emotionally unacceptable. He was addicted to the risk, to the genuine human connection. The surveillance tightened, becoming a psychological weapon. Svetlana felt it too. Her supervisor at Goskino, a stern party woman, called her in for a chat. Svetlana Yurievna, your work has been adequate, the supervisor said, not looking up from her papers. But it has come to our attention that you are distracted. We expect our Komsomol members to set an example. Remember, associations are important. A good Soviet girl should not have complicated friendships. Svetlana left the office, her hands trembling. The chat was not a warning, it was a notification. She was being watched. The net was now in place. Orlov's team had hours of recordings of Arthur and Svetlana's meetings. They had photographs. They had reports from her supervisor. They had a psychological profile. They did not have evidence of espionage, but they had something far better, evidence of a relationship. And in the USSR of 1974, an unauthorized relationship between a Soviet citizen and a Western spy was a loaded weapon. The confrontation that defined the Romeo case was not the one Major Orlov had anticipated. He had assumed the decisive moment would be between his directorate and the spy. Instead, the confrontation was personal, emotional, and ultimately far more damaging to Penwright's state of mind. It was early December. The first heavy snow had fallen, muffling the city in a blanket of white and gray. Arthur was becoming frayed. The constant surveillance, which he could no longer deny, was grinding him down. He was making mistakes. He missed a window, a prearranged time to check a dead drop location. His superiors in London sent a terse coded message via the diplomatic bag demanding a sitrep situation report on his operational silence. He was trapped between his professional duties, which demanded he go clean, and his personal desires, which drove him to see Svetlana. He arranged to meet her at the Novodevichy convent and cemetery, a place of somber beauty, quiet and usually empty in the deep cold. He believed the open space offered better security. Svetlana arrived late. She was not wearing the bright blue scarf he had bought for her from the Beryozka hard currency shop. She was pale, her face tight with a tension that was more than just the cold. "Art," she began, not using the familiar Artyusha she had adopted. She used his English name. "We cannot do this." "Sveta, what's wrong?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Is it work?" "It is not work," she snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "It is everything. You must not see me again." "What happened? Did someone threaten you?" Svetlana turned on him, her dark eyes flashing. "Who are you, Arthur? You tell me you work in culture. You bring me books. You tell me about London. But the people who came to my apartment, they were not from the Ministry of Culture." Arthur's blood ran cold. "Who? Who came to your apartment?" "Two men, in dark suits. They were very polite." Her voice broke and she began to cry, silent, angry tears that froze on her cheeks. "They did not threaten my mother. They just talked. They asked about her pension. They asked about my brother's application to the university. And then they asked about you." This was the confrontation. The system had bypassed him and gone directly to her. This was not the top toonie on the street. This was Line S, the Department for Internal Control. "What did they ask?" Arthur said, his mind racing. He was no longer a lover. He was a handler trying to manage a compromised asset. "They asked what you wanted from me, what anti-Soviet materials you gave me." She laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "I showed them the book of poetry. They said you were a spion, a spy. They said you were using me to shame my country." "Sveta, that's not true. Is it?" she interrupted, her gaze hard. "Are you a spy, Arthur?" The question hung in the frigid air between them. He was a diplomat. He was trained to lie, to dissemble, to deflect. But looking at her, seeing the genuine terror and betrayal in her eyes, his professional mask crumbled. He could not tell her the truth. It would put her in even greater danger. But he could not lie to her, not now. He said nothing. His silence was the only answer she needed. She took a step back as if he were physically contaminated. They told me," she whispered, "that I am a good Soviet citizen, that I made a mistake. They said I could fix my mistake, that I could show my loyalty." "Svetlana, what did they ask you to do?" Arthur said, grabbing her arm. She pulled away. "To see you, to keep talking to you, to tell them everything." She was being doubled, turned into an unwilling informant against him. The KGB was using her to control him. "You must go," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the emotion from moments before. She was shutting down. "Go back to your embassy. Do not contact me again. They are watching. They are always watching." She turned and ran, slipping on the icy path before disappearing through the convent gates. Arthur stood alone in the cemetery, surrounded by the graves of Russia's great artists and writers. He was a cultural attaché, completely and utterly compromised. He had failed his service, but more acutely, he had failed her. He had brought the full, terrifying weight of the state down on an ordinary typist, all for a moment of human connection. The confrontation was over. He had lost. Arthur Penwright's arrest was not a clandestine operation in a dark alley. It was a bureaucratic procedure, executed with the cold, polite precision of the Soviet state. The exposure was total, the culmination of Orlov's Romeo file. The lever of personal connection was about to be pulled. After the confrontation at Novodevichy, Arthur retreated to the sterile safety of his apartment. He was, in operational terms, blown. He knew it. He spent 2 days in a state of suspended dread, filing a generic, coded report to London about local sensitivities and postponed meetings, a weak attempt to cover his paralysis. He did not, however, report the compromise of Svetlana. To do so would be to admit his own catastrophic failure. Major Orlov, reading the transcripts from the cemetery, a directional microphone had picked up most of the conversation, knew it was time to close the trap. Penwright was isolated, paranoid, and emotionally compromised. Svetlana was terrified and pliable. The final act was set in motion. Svetlana was invited for a second chat. This time, she was not met by functionaries. She was brought to the Lubyanka, not to a cell, but to a small, warmly lit office. Major Orlov introduced himself. He was fatherly, concerned. He offered her tea and a ptitsa moloko, bird's milk chocolate. Svetlana Yuryevna, Orlov began, stirring his own tea. You have been put in a difficult position. This man, Penwright, he is not a good person. He is an intelligence officer. His job is to find weaknesses in our society. He has used your trust, your friendship, to gather information, to put you and your family at risk. He paused, letting the implication sink in. He has compromat on you, Svetlana. Photographs, your conversations. He could use them to ruin your life. But we can protect you. Svetlana sat rigid, her hands clenched. What do you want? We want to stop him, Orlov said simply. We cannot have foreign agents preying on our citizens. He has diplomatic status. We cannot correct him as we would a normal criminal. We must expose him. We must catch him in an act that is incompatible with his status. He leaned forward. He lives in the diplomatic compound, a place Soviet citizens are forbidden to enter. We want you to go to his apartment. No, Svetlana whispered. I cannot. The militsioner at the gate will be helpful. For one night, Orchov assured her. You will go. You will tell him you are frightened, that you need his help, that you want to be with him. You will go inside. You will accept a drink. That is all. And then, she asked, her voice hollow, and then this will be over. You will have proven your loyalty. Your mother's pension will be secure. Your brother's application will be reevaluated in a positive light. You will be a hero of the state quietly. It was a perfect trap, using her fear as the bait and her family's welfare as the incentive. Svetlana Ivanova, the Goskino typist, had no choice. She agreed. 2 nights later, the doorbell rang at Arthur Penwright's apartment. It was 9:00 p.m. He opened the door. It was Svetlana. She looked frantic, her hair damp with snow. Arthur, Artyusha, please, she stammered, pushing past him into the room. I'm sorry, I was so scared. I had to see you. I can't be without you. Arthur was stunned. This was the most massive, unthinkable breach of protocol. A Soviet national, unescorted, in the diplomatic compound, in his apartment. Sveta, you can't be here, he said, his voice a low panic. This is insane. How did you get past the gate? I told them I was delivering a package. I ran. She lied. The script Orlov had fed her. Please, just let me stay. Just for a minute. He saw the feigned desperation in her eyes and his resolve crumbled. He was a spy, but he was also the man who had caused this. He had a duty to protect her. All right, he said. Just sit down. Let me get you a drink, a brandy. It will calm you. He turned his back on her and walked to the sideboard. He poured 2 glasses. As he turned back, the doorbell rang again. He froze. Svetlana looked at the door, her face a mask of pure, unfeigned terror. This part, he realized, was not in her script. The bell rang again, longer this time. Arthur, his hands shaking, put the glasses down and walked to the door. He looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway were 2 men in dark, heavy coats, the archetypal figures of the 2nd Directorate. Between them stood a shorter, uniformed official from UPDK. Arthur Penwright opened the door. Mr. Penwright? The UPDK official asked, his voice reedy. Yes. The 2 men stepped forward. One of them was Major Orlov. He smiled, a thin, bureaucratic gesture. Arthur Penwright, Orlov began in clear, formal Russian. We are representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and State Security. He gestured into the apartment where Svetlana was visible, trembling by the sofa. We find you in the company of a Soviet citizen, Svetlana Ivanova, in your apartment. A clear violation of Soviet law, Article 122, regarding unauthorized contact. She has entered this restricted compound illegally. Orlov stepped past Arthur into the apartment. He looked at the 2 glasses of brandy on the sideboard. Furthermore, Orlov continued, his voice devoid of emotion, we have reason to believe you have been engaging in activities incompatible with your diplomatic status. You have been observed attempting to suborn a Soviet citizen, to gather intelligence, and to spread anti-Soviet propaganda. He turned to face Arthur. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics has declared you persona non grata. You have 24 hours to leave the territory of the USSR. It was not an arrest. It was an expulsion, a trial conducted in his own living room. The exposure was complete. The fall was a quiet, bureaucratic checkmate. Orlov nodded to his associate, who walked over to Svetlana. Come, citizen, the man said, not unkindly. You are required as a witness. Svetlana did not look at Arthur. She simply picked up her coat and walked out of the apartment, escorted by the KGB agent. Major Orlov lingered for a moment. He looked around the sterile apartment. Your housekeeper will be by in the morning to assist with your packing, Mr. Penwright. Good evening. He closed the door, leaving Arthur Penwright alone in the center of the room, a glass of brandy in his hand, his life, both professional and personal, utterly dismantled. For Arthur Penwright, the interrogation was a silent, internal affair conducted in the 24 hours he had left in Moscow. The state had made its judgment. Now came the institutional response from his own side. His expulsion was the trial, and the verdict was already public. The 24-hour PNG, persona non grata notice, was a brutal, efficient mechanism. It was designed to maximize humiliation and logistical panic. As Orlov left, the militianer at the compound gate was replaced by 2 stoic internal troops, a visual confirmation that apartment 7B was now a state matter. Arthur's first call was to the embassy's head of station, C. The line clicked and hissed. Penwright, I need to come in, Arthur said, his voice flat. We know, the voice on the other end said, cold as the Moscow night. We received the nota from the MID, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 10 minutes ago. Activities incompatible. Stay in your flat, do not leave, do not speak to anyone. But you are a Case 7 expulsion, Arthur. You are considered contaminated. Pack your personal effects. A car will collect you for the 10 a.m. British Airways flight to Heathrow, that is all. The line went dead. There was no trial, no defense. In the Cold War, an agent PNG'd under these circumstances was not a hero, he was a failure. He had been caught. Worse, he had been caught in a morals trap, the most amateurish of blunders. He spent the night sanitizing his apartment. It was a hollow, pointless ritual. He knew the KGB and Zenaida had already been through everything. But he followed his training. He burned his personal diary in a metal wastebasket. He used a razor to destroy the microdot concealed in the spine of a book. He flushed the ashes. It was the theater of espionage, performed for an audience that had already left. At 8 a.m., Zenaida, the housekeeper, arrived. She was accompanied by the UPDK official from the night before, who held a clipboard. Mr. Penwright, we are here to catalog the state's property, the official announced. Zenaida, her face impassive, began counting the state-issued teaspoons. It was the ultimate humiliation, his grand ideological failure reduced to a petty inventory check. While Arthur was packing his one suitcase, Svetlana Ivanova was undergoing her own trial. She was not at the Lubyanka. She was in a small, windowless debriefing room at a safe house. Major Orlov was there along with a stenographer. Let the record show, Orlov dictated, that citizen Ivanova, Svetlana Yurievna, acted in full cooperation with the organs of state security. He turned to her. She was pale, exhausted, but alive. Svetlana Yurievna, you have performed a great service. You helped us expose a foreign agent who sought to do you harm. He slid a paper across the table. It was a podpiska, a secrecy non-disclosure agreement. It stated that she would never, under any circumstances, discuss the events of the past few weeks or her cooperation with anyone. The penalty was Article 58, anti-Soviet agitation. This Orlov said, tapping the paper, "is for your protection, so that no one can misunderstand your patriotism." She signed it. "You will return to your job at Goskino tomorrow," Orlov continued. "Everything will be as it was. Your supervisor understands the situation. You are a loyal citizen." He stood up, the signal that the trial was over. "Your brother," he added as an afterthought, "seems to have a very strong academic record. I am sure the University Admissions Board will see that." Svetlana walked out into the Moscow morning. She was free. She had won. She had survived, but she felt profoundly, irreversibly unclean. The state had used her, soiled her relationship, and then cleansed her with a bureaucratic form. She was now a non-person, a walking state secret, trapped in the very life she had briefly dreamed of escaping. At 9:30 a.m., the embassy car, a black Austin Princess, arrived at Kutuzovsky Prospect. Arthur Penwright walked out, carrying his single bag. The UPDK official made him sign the inventory list. Penwright got in the back of the car. The embassy driver, a taciturn ex-military man, did not speak. They drove to Sheremetyevo Airport. He was escorted through a diplomatic exit, bypassing customs. He sat in the empty VIP lounge for 10 minutes. Then he was led to the plane. As he walked across the tarmac, he looked back at the bleak gray terminal. He felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just the hollow, icy calm of complete and total failure. The trial was over. The sentence was exile. The consequences of the Romeo affair rippled outward, slowly and destructively, long after Penwright's flight cleared Soviet airspace. The aftermath was not a single event, but a protracted, quiet unraveling for everyone involved. For Arthur Penwright, the debriefing in London was swift and brutal. He was met at Heathrow not by a handler, but by a junior personnel officer from the FCO, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and a man from security. He was taken to a safe house in Surrey, a sterile, damp cottage for a formal debriefing. His head of station, C, a man he had only met twice, conducted the interview. It was not an interrogation, it was a professional autopsy. "Activities incompatible," C said, reading the MID's nota with distaste. "A morals charge, Arthur, a honey trap. And you weren't even the target. You built the trap yourself and then walked into it. You developed a source, broke every rule of contact, failed to report the relationship, and then, after you were compromised, you still failed to report. It wasn't a honey trap," Arthur said, his voice weak. "It was genuine." C looked at him with something approaching pity. "Good God, man, that's worse. You believed it. You let a Goskino typist blow up a 3-year posting. You endangered yourself, you endangered her, and worst of all, you forced the service to burn a dozen other low-level assets in Moscow as a precaution. You are a liability, Penwright." The aftermath for Arthur was not a firing. The service didn't fire people like that. It managed them. He was grounded permanently. He was given a lateral transfer to a desk-bound position in a gray building in Croydon, a suburb far from the glamour of Whitehall. His new job was to analyze Soviet agricultural reports from the state-run TASS news agency. It was a bureaucratic graveyard. He was on the shelf, a leper in the closed community of the service. Colleagues he once knew nodded curtly in the canteen but never sat at his table. He had committed the cardinal sin. He had allowed personal feelings to interfere with professional judgment. The romance had cost him his career, his purpose, and his reputation. In Moscow, the aftermath for Svetlana Ivanova was quieter and infinitely more cruel. As promised, she kept her job at Goskino. But the system knew. Major Orlov's protection was a curse. Her supervisor, the stern party woman, was now sickeningly polite to her. "Svetlana Yurievna, would you be so kind as to retype this memo? Take your time." Her colleagues, who had once shared jokes and complaints, now fell silent when she approached the tea urn. They knew instinctively that she was connected in a way that was dangerous. She was the woman who had been involved with a spy and survived. This meant she was either a remarkable victim or worse, an informant. She was a pariah, isolated in a sea of 8 million people. Her brother, as promised, was accepted into Moscow State University. Her mother's pension benefits increased. The state had kept its bargain. but it had taken Svetlana's social existence as payment. She was trapped. She could never marry a good Soviet man. Her file was marked. She could never apply for a better job. She was needed at Goskino, where the second directorate could keep an eye on her. She had been used to expose Arthur, and her reward was to be turned into a living warning for others. She ate her lunch alone, she went home alone, and she learned to fear the politeness of officials. For Major Victor Orlov, the aftermath was a promotion. The Romeo file was cited as a textbook case of successful counterintelligence. He had identified a vulnerability, cultivated it using the object's own emotional weakness, and resolved the situation with a clean expulsion, all without compromising Soviet methods or assets. He had protected the state. He was awarded the Order of the Red Banner of Labor and was moved to a more senior position, overseeing surveillance on the entire American diplomatic corps. He did not think of Arthur Penwright or Svetlana Ivanova again. They were closed files, filed away in the archives of the Lubyanka. The slow grind of years and the shifting tectonic plates of geopolitics assigned the legacy of such events. The case of Penwright and Ivanova, so critical to its participants in 1974, became a forgotten footnote in a conflict defined by grander narratives. Arthur Penwright. By 1989, Arthur Penwright was a shell of the man he had been. He was still at his desk in Croydon, analyzing grain reports. He had never married. His colleagues were now men and women who had never served abroad, who knew him only as Old Art, the quiet man in the corner who drank too much tea and never spoke at the office Christmas party. He watched the news of the Berlin Wall's fall with a profound, bitter detachment. He saw the crowds celebrating, the world he knew, the world of rigid compartments of us and them, crumbling on live television. His entire career, his sacrifice of reputation and happiness, had been in service to a game that was now ending, a game whose rules had just been declared obsolete. His file at SIS headquarters was marked NFA, no further action, and closed. He was a ghost in the system, a burnout, a cautionary tale for new recruits on the dangers of local attachments. His legacy was one of failure, a professional footnote. He had not betrayed his country with ideology, but with a simple human need for connection, which, in the calculus of the Cold War, was the more unforgivable sin. Svetlana Ivanova. Svetlana also watched the changes, but from the center of the storm. The Zastoy gave way to the chaos of perestroika and glasnost. The Goskino ministry was restructured, then privatized, then dissolved. Svetlana, the marked woman, the pariah, was suddenly just unemployed. In a strange way, the collapse of the Soviet Union liberated her. The system that had watched her, that had held her file, was itself collapsing. The KGB was reformed, its archives in disarray. Her secret no longer mattered. No one cared about a typist's cooperation from 15 years prior when the economy was evaporating. She ended up working as a translator and fixer for Western journalists who flooded Moscow in the early 1990s, eager to document the new Russia. She was tough, fluent in English, a skill she had practiced in secret for years, and possessed a deep, unshakable cynicism about all forms of authority. She never spoke of Arthur. She never spoke of the Lubyanka. Her legacy was survival. She had outlasted the system that had tried to define her, but it had carved a piece out of her that never returned. She trusted no one. Major Victor Orlov retired in 1990, just before the end. He was a pensioner, a hero of state security, which in the new pro-Western climate of Yeltsin's Russia was a title of abuse. He saw his life's work dismantled. The organs he had served were decried as a criminal enterprise. The agents he had exposed were now welcomed as business partners. He would sit on a park bench, feeding pigeons, reading the new newspapers with their sensational exposés of KGB operations. He felt no remorse. He had been a soldier in a long, quiet war. He had done his job. He had protected the motherland from ideological saboteurs like Penwright. His legacy, in his own mind, was one of duty. In the mind of the new state, he was an embarrassment, a relic of a totalitarian past best forgotten. He died of a heart attack in 1995, his passing unnoticed. The apartment on Kutuzovsky Prospect was eventually sold to a new Russian oligarch. The listening devices in the walls, long dead, were simply plastered over during the renovation. The Romeo case, File 44B, Ivanova, Eyes 14B, Penwright, offers a precise clinical study of the Cold War's true battlefield. This conflict was not, in its daily reality, fought with armies, but with psychology, bureaucracy, and the meticulous exploitation of human frailty. In retrospect, the affair was not a matter of good versus evil in the cinematic sense. It was a collision of systems. Arthur Penwright represented a system that valued individualism, yet demanded absolute conformity from its intelligence agents. He was encouraged to spot weakness in others, yet was forbidden from displaying any of his own. His failure was not espionage, it was hypocrisy. He preached a Western value of personal freedom while his professional life demanded its total suppression. The Soviet system, embodied by Major Orlov, was, in its own way, more honest. It was openly totalitarian. It did not pretend to value the individual. The individual, Svetlana Ivanova, was a citizen, a cog in the state machine. Her loyalty was assumed, her cooperation was mandatory, and her personal feelings were irrelevant. The KGB did not need to use physical force. It used leverage. It used her mother's pension, her brother's education, and her own reputation as compromat. The romance was not the weapon. It was the fulcrum on which the state applied its immense pressure. The ultimate tragedy is the ambiguity of the romance itself. Was it genuine? Or was it, for both of them, a useful fantasy? For Arthur, Svetlana was an escape from the sterile, lonely world of the diplomatic compound. She was authentic Russia. For Svetlana, Arthur was a window out, a glimpse of a Western world of books, ideas, and personal agency. The system, Orlov, decided it was a threat and transformed it into a tool. The romance did not just bring the KGB to the apartment. The KGB was already there. It was in the walls, in the telephone, in the housekeeper, and in the friendships at work. The romance merely provided the justification for the system's final, overt intervention. The case serves as a stark reminder that in the 20th century's ideological struggle, the most personal, intimate spaces, a park bench, a living room, a human heart, were considered strategic territory. The true legacy of the Cold War is not just in the political maps it redrew, but in the countless unrecorded files like that of Penwright and Ivanova, small lives consumed by a vast, impersonal, and paranoid machine.